So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we make a return to the Iron Hills. It's been quite a long time actually since I showed off a replay on this map, but I am quite a big fan of it, to be honest with you, because it does act as one of the best natural siege maps I think that is in the game, to be honest, because there are several choke points. It definitely has that feeling of sort of an attack-defense game whenever you see a game on this map. But it's also open enough that allows some play that you wouldn't see in many siege battles. So it's definitely a personal favourite of mine, and it's definitely better than most of the other sort of standard field battle maps, I think, just because it does have quite a lot of interest. Albeit, if you are going to play this game on sort of more of an even keel, so to speak, it might be a good idea to allow everyone to sort of position themselves so that one team doesn't have the advantage of all of this high ground over here. But today it is going to be attack versus defense, because we have two teams. The red team are going to be on the defense, the blue team are going to be on the attack. And like I said, this isn't entirely lore friendly, albeit I think I can sort of say that it's going to be sort of a rivalry match between Mordor and Angmar, and they have brought their selection of allies to the field today. Weirdly for Mordor, they've picked Lothlorien, and for Angmar they've picked Amroth and Cardolan, interestingly enough. And we will go through the attacking army compositions first of all, starting off with the player who sent me the battle replay, who is over here, which is Vlasov, who is playing as Cardolan. Cardolan are definitely a... When players play Cardolan, you know that they really like them. I mean, it's definitely a Marmite sort of faction, I would say. You either love them or you hate them. For some people, the low morale of Cardolan overall can be too big of an obstacle to overcome, and they just don't like playing as them. I'm of the opposite opinion, however. I do think Cardolan can be extremely effective, and to be honest with you, their strengths, I think, do outweigh their major weakness in terms of morale. I think that, you know, they're certainly not the worst faction in the game by any means. I think they're definitely top half, if not top quarter, depending on the map and depending on how effectively their crossbows can be utilised. We've got some Greenway Garrison archers on the front, a very numerous archer, and obviously this means that individually they're of relatively low quality, but they're good in a skirmish fight because there's simply so many of them that it takes a lot of ammunition to tear through them all. And of course there are so many of them that even though they have low missile damage individually, this damage does add up. So if you do want to sort of take the long-winded skirmish approach with Cardolan, which you may want to do because your crossbows you'll want to save to later, the Greenway Garrison archers can be a good pick. Speaking of which, just in behind we have the fully upgraded Minotaur Romen Gatekeepers, Cardolan's finest crossbow unit, very heavily armoured. They also have a bit of a shield value, and they are halberdiers in melee, really good all-rounder. The only thing they really miss is a second hit point to make them a bodyguard unit, but of course if they were a bodyguard unit there'd be less men in the unit. So it's an interesting thing. I think they're actually better as they are because it allows them to get a lot of DPS off. Always a good idea to upgrade them with the armour as well, because it means that skirmishing them down, which you may want to do with many crossbows, is much less of a viable option. Minhiriath sharpshooters are the more basic crossbow Cardolan have at their disposal, but they're still armoured up by crossbow standards. They still have that shield on their back, and they are macemen in melee, so once again a very multifaceted unit, very useful for what Cardolan are all about. And bound up in these two units are the main reason why you'd want to play Cardolan, to be honest with you. I know that in Divide and Conquer crossbows are much more of a mixed bag, and they don't really carry the same sort of punch in general, but certainly in Reforged, crossbows are a brutal tool if you use them effectively because of their stopping power, armor piercing bolts. You know, it's very difficult to mitigate the damage, if well, impossible really, to be honest with you, if they get a good shot, and Cardolan can bring that to the field very effectively. They're also able to bring a lot of pikes. The Wardens of Tirngorth add to the higher tier pike that they can bring. Important for them as well because they buff the morale of nearby troops, which means as they fight on the front line, the line battle isn't going to go horribly against you as your troops break, because they will at least stand and fight even if they don't outright win. And the Greenway Garrison Footmen are a budget pike unit, which of course, you know, based on how Medieval 2's mechanics work with pikes, they're a very good choice because you don't have to spend an awful lot of money for them, and they can punch well above their weight on the front line. The debate about a pike-dominated meta still boils away to a certain extent, and this is one of the units that can fuel that sort of debate, to be honest with you, because it's so cheap and yet potentially so effective. But we'll see if that's the case in this battle. More Greenway Garrison units, the Spearmen. So of all the Greenway Garrison units, these are probably the least useful, but even so, militia spears that are capable of, you know, at least acting as a sort of buffer, can shore up the line as well. Again, very cheap, good defensive stats actually, a good tar pit, but in melee they do very little damage against infantry. But still, another nice cheap unit for Cardolan they can bring. The Minhiriath Men-at-Arms, obviously a nice unit of line infantry, very basic, you know, they're not going to set the world on fire by any means, but still, it really helps to have them in and amongst a unit like the Greenway Garrison Footmen to offer a little bit more solidity and survivability up close. Some unupgraded Dunedain captains as well. Nice unit of heavy swordsmen, but maybe not on the same sort of level as other bodyguard tier heavy swordsmen. More Minhiriath Men-at-Arms. So there's 3 units just in behind there. And finally, General's Bodyguard, the Hearthguard of Amon Sul, the heavy archer, very heavily armoured, big shield value as well, spears in melee. Safe place to put your general, but not an exceptional damage dealer by any means. Now, we may also get a chance to see Dol Amroth perform a little bit more naturally as it comes to them. Most of the time when we've seen Dol Amroth recently, they've gone full infantry, and it hasn't really worked out for them in the vast majority of cases for good reason. They've got some Doran Ernal swordsmen here, Elendikar, who has got some militia swords, some basic spears in the Tarnostians. We have got some Perithil champions, we've got a couple of units of the Ethelond Men-at-Arms as well, so some heavy swordsmen surrounded by some more basic units and some militia. I think there's probably some hidden units in there. Yeah, Wanderers of Nimrodel, so the Rangers are here. Potentially huge damage from them. Belfalas Marines for a bit of AP damage. And we've got some Tirithea Marksmen with some long-range skirmishing, some Ethelond Halberdiers for the armour piercing as well, Phalanx armour piercing, and then a line infantry unit here, the Black Swan Renegades, who have those maces, so that's even more AP, which will be useful against Lothlorien, but more so I think against Mordor. But we may get to see Dol Amroth's cavalry be effective today, as we see the unit of the Haven Knights, which of course really, really effective melee knights, one of the best units of melee cavalry in the game. Certainly from actually the good factions, they could have a case for being just straight up the best unit of melee cavalry. So a lot of the other really high tier melee cavalry is actually from the evil factions, interestingly enough. And then over here, a couple of units of Knights of the Silver Swan, some upper tier heavy lancers. They're single HP though, so they are perhaps a little bit more fragile than they look actually in the Reforged meta. But you can use them effectively, but you do need to micro them efficiently. Otherwise they will die off quicker perhaps than you expect. Then we have Angmar, who apparently have a unit hidden out in front over here, but we can't see that. Regardless, for what we can see of the Angmar army, commanded by Ingemar, he's got some Blackwatch Legion, some Goblin Trackers, some Witch Realm Scourge Raiders, some Angmar Halberds, so a more disposable unit, some Witch Realm Pikemen, classic Angmar to bring a huge amount of Phalanx units, so that once they get into melee aggressively, it can be very difficult to get rid of them and you can end up getting worn down, especially if they're backed up by some of their tankier units like the Guardians of Khan Doom. Not the most aggressive infantry unit in terms of damage, but certainly capable of looking after themselves defensively. We've got some Trolls of Gundabad, and we also have the Witch Realm Blackguard and the Witch Realm Hammerguard as well. So both bodyguard tier infantry units, the Blackguard being the more defensive, and the Hammerguard, I should say, being by far the more aggressive, of course. But a dangerous mix indeed. And then moving on to the red team, heading up the Mordor army, we have Pimp, who has got some Troll Drummers. He's also got the Minas Morgul's Chosen, which are a really good unit just for helping tie Mordor's front line together. They're really good on terms of defensive values, very heavily armoured. Spears in general are much better at keeping themselves alive for sort of longer periods of time than regular infantry are. But they're not the most damaging unit by any means. They're sort of the solid core to your front line. You're going to have to do damage through other means really, but they do give you that base to fall back upon. Obviously the fodder are not your damage dealer either, they're just sort of here to get in the way really. The Orc Maulers on the other hand are one of your damage dealers, the lowest tier that you have really. Heavy Axeman, good at dealing AP damage though, so that will be useful against all of the factions they're facing off against today, should it be called upon. Sauron's Will are the upper tier version of them, of course, with a few sort of things like inspiration effects, but also just better stats overall. Orc Maulers, obviously again more heavy Axeman. The Melkor's Chosen, which it'd be interesting to see them go up against the Haven Knights. I'd probably give the slight advantage in that particular battle to the Melkor's Chosen actually. But of course Dol Amroth have got more mounted units with them. Having said that, we do have the Beasts of Gorgoroth, the Great Beasts of Mordor themselves. They're sort of like a lightweight version of the Mumakil, albeit the missiles they use are javelins. So in a sense, in that respect anyway, I do think they're actually better than the Mumakil because the javelins are more useful. Having said that, as the actual creature themselves, the Mumakil are going to be stronger because they are more survivable. But having said that, the Great Beast will still do the same job. I mean, it's all about micro. If you're doing your job correctly, after all, the Great Beast and the Mumakil shouldn't be getting hit all that often because you should be pulling through the lines quickly. Temple Guard, Olag High, the Nazgul are here as well. You can see the Temple Executioners, Blackguard of Barad-dûr, Minas Morgul Chosen. So obviously they've got a little bit more money to play with than the other armies. Sauron's Will, and another unit of melee cavalry, the Temple Inquisitors. They will lose to the Haven Knights though, even if they are another unit of melee cavalry, but they will at least hold their own. And finally, Awesome Boss Death, who's playing as Lothlorien. He's got some Lorinand warriors. Good choice. Again, AP, something that the other Elven factions really do lack as a unit of dedicated armor-piercing shock infantry. Most of them rely on heavy swordsmen to do most of their damage in melee. There are other heavy axemen from Mirkwood, but they're bound up in archers. So this is like a dedicated unit of armor-piercing shock, and that will be very useful against all of the factions that they are arrayed against once again. This is the heavy swordsman, so this is more akin to what the other Elven factions normally have, the Lorinand Swordmasters, and of course they trade in their AP damage for higher base damage and a significantly higher melee defense as well. So that will be useful against them as well. March Wardens of the Wood, poison arrows, obviously very useful against Cardolan in particular, could be quite grisly for them. Lorinand Archers, once again, very rare that you see the Lothlorien brought to the field and not see the Kindred of Celeborn and the Watchers of the Golden Wood. Interesting to see the Kindred of Celeborn don't have their armour upgrade, which is a shame because their armour upgrade looks superb. Watchers of the Golden Wood here as well, however, so that's the split shots and the Silverthorns arrows that are going to be utilised. 2 units of the Lorinand Mounted Company. They want to steer clear of Dol Amroth's cab for sure because they're Lancers. Elven Lancers can look after themselves in melee because of higher melee defense, but it's still not terribly efficient to have them in there because they're so expensive that everyone lost is a tragedy. And they also have arguably the best horse arch unit in the game in the Riders of the Golden Wood. And they obviously have the same Silverthorn arrows that their foot-based variant have. Woodland Protectors, Lorinand Axemen over here as well, so line infantry. And they'll be really, really dominant as long as they avoid the pikes of Cardolan and some Lorinand spears in loose formation. I will make a bit of a cut because this is a map where the deployment zones are such that they do start a little ways away from one another. Shouldn't be too big of a cut, I would hope, but yeah, I'll make a cut and we'll rejoin when the action is beginning. I can't help but feel like this is probably going to go quite poorly for these Angmar halberdiers as they get into position because they are moving up, they are going to get their phalanx ready, but Cairn Amroth Rangers are right there, an unsurprising pick from Lothlorien to be sure. When you're on the defence, a unit of Elven Rangers like this can be incredibly useful, and obviously the Cairn Amroth Rangers combine that by being a heavy swordsman as well, but you can see that they are sort of laying the groundwork for the attack. They haven't fully begun yet, but I can't imagine it will be too long. The Cairn Amroth Rangers will probably go back into hiding any moment, to be honest with you, and they could be skirmished down, to be fair. Dol Amroth and Angmar could utilise some cheaper archers maybe to keep the Cairn Amroth Rangers at arm's length, at least for the time being. Meanwhile, over on this side of things, Lorinand Archers are sort of just holding their ground for the moment. The Lorinand Mounted Company move forward, and this is unfortunate for Cardolan in a way. They could do with one of the units of Dol Amroth Cavalry over here giving them a hand, as the Elven Lancers charge forward and Vlasov has left his squishy archers open for a charge. As they do, of course, the other archers are going to try and focus down the Lorinand Mounted Company, and to be fair, that isn't really the best of trades. Only a few of those archers ended up falling. And many more actually of the Lorinand Mounted Company do. So you can see there the crossbows, especially when the Lorinand Cavalry's back was turned, they fell in droves. So that was actually a very poor assault really. It didn't really go the way that Lorien were hoping for at all. Very disappointing for them. But you can see now the Cairn Amroth Rangers are beginning an assault on what, I wonder, on some Scourge Raiders? Not the worst target to go after, but I would say that the March Wardens of the Wood would probably be a better choice for going after them, because you'll still get the same amount of kills more or less, and you can save the Rangers for the inevitable blob that is going to form on this hill over here. Speaking of which, the first of the melee engagements is likely to get underway right now as the Angmar Halberdiers get into melee with the Orc fodder. The Adunheim Shadow Bows though getting far too close to the action. Pimp is going to have to force march them away from the front line. The Halberdiers, to be fair, that's quick reactions there to get them onto the Adunheim Shadow Bows. And obviously that is the Mordor unit of Rangers today, so if you can kill off some of them, that would definitely be a bit of a bonus this early on, especially if you can do so with a unit that would be really bad at dealing with range of fire in Halberdiers, lightly armoured Halberdiers at that, relatively speaking. There are some Scourge Raiders, Blackwatch Legion on the way forward. I mean, if they're going to send forward the Great Shield Infantry, they need to send forward infantry to follow it in. If they commit it now, it's far too early. They're not going to be able to take full advantage of it. And there are Lothlorien units on the way as well. Those Lothlorien warriors will rip Blackwatch Legion apart when it comes to a melee fight. However, Cardolan also moving forward, getting ready to attack into the Mordor and... Well, actually, no, it's mostly a Mordor front line. Actually, Lothlorien have peeled a lot of their units off. The Blackguard of Barad-dûr and the Minas Morgul chosen. Heavily armoured units, certainly, but you can see that several of them are falling. It's rare to see the Blackguard fall under ranged attacks, but of course that's because what's hitting them isn't archers, it's crossbows, which of course can punch through the normal defences that would work on arrows with really very little effort. Minhiriath men-at-arms getting ready to move in with pikes, but I mean, if Mordor are just going to sit there, then those crossbows can be used to good effect. But obviously it will mean they have to use up their ammunition fairly early on, which maybe they won't want to do too much of. You can see there the Cairn Amroth Rangers are getting shot. I'd imagine that's from the Goblin trackers. Adonai Shadowbows are in there as well. I mean, the Angmar Halberdiers have routed as a result of the Lornand warriors joining the Orc fodder on the front line. The Scourge Raiders trying to get in here to throw their projectiles. They're not going to be given the opportunity though, as the warriors from Lothlorien continue to charge down the hill, and it's going to be, again, very painful for stuff like the Scourge Raiders. That armour piercing going to be very, very handy for Lothlorien as the battle continues. Cairn Amroth Rangers, what are they firing at still? They're still trying to shoot into that blob down there. It's not the best opportunity for Awesome Boss Death though. If I were him, I would have waited to try and utilise that a little bit longer. Here are the great beasts though, the beasts of Gorgoroth I should say. But they kind of jumped the gun a little bit there. They charged right into the Cardolan lines, but Elephant class units are not going to enjoy being in melee with pikes because they do count as a mounted unit after all. The javelins would be quite useful for breaking them up, but again you can see they're falling away here as well, so the crossbows are presumably targeting them. This is the thing, like, these Elephant class units are very difficult to actually utilise effectively, as the Mordor player here I think is finding out. Probably would have been better to actually keep them back and use them later, or maybe try and catch Cardolan out by going fully on the offensive and using them as the vanguard. Here though, Greenway Garrison units moving in, the Minas Morgul chosen, holding the line. This is going to be a pretty brutal fight for both sides. I mean, the Nazgul are in here. You'd have to say that the initial phase should go the way of Mordor, to be honest with you, because the Minhiriath I don't think are going to do too well against some of these Mordor elites and all of this armour piercing. But it could be, as the fight wears on, that all of the Cardolan pikes actually start to come into their own, and the supporting units from Cardolan in behind, all of their ranged units, also start to really do the business. But Mordor are really front-loading here, so they are actually being incredibly aggressive. The Beasts of Gorgoroth, though, I think are all dead at this point, which is a real tragedy. We saw them very briefly, but perhaps that's why they don't get brought very often. Minas Morgul chosen with the Sauron's Will, both of them covering for one another's weakness to a certain extent. Warns of Tir Gorthad doing the business on the front line for now, but I imagine as soon as the line starts to get worked up by Mordor, that will cease to be the case. But there's a lot of crossbows in the background. Tharbad Warhammers and Dunedain Captains are moving forward. Greenway Garrison Archers, yeah, like crossbows and archers, like they've got a lot of support here on the front line. Here you can see the trolls swinging their big clubs and hammers around as well. Going to be doing damage to the pikes, so yeah, I think Mordor will be fine on this side of things because they're committing a lot of their strength. So it's going to have to come down to this part of the battlefield perhaps, where the attackers have to make some headway. And considering they're going to have to deal with the high quality units of Lothlorien over here, it's probably easier said than done. And you can see the Guardians of Khan Doom are trying to get off the front line, or trying to at least reposition themselves to attack in a slightly more stable fashion. Cairn Amroth Rangers firing away. Bit of a better position for them to shoot, but also slightly more exposed to enemy archers. Speaking of which, Kindred of Celeborn are over here now, and they're going to shoot right down into that nice blob. So over here as well for the attackers, it's proving to be quite the bruising encounter so far. Lothlorien definitely getting their skirmishers into a good position, allowing their quality on the front line to do some damage as well. So Angmar and Dol Amroth, they need to sort of make a choice fairly quickly here, and I think Dol Amroth is, to their credit. They're sending over a fair amount of support to try and help Cardolan out in breaking through against Mordor, but they're going to need to hurry up a little bit. I mean, the Adunaim Shadowbows, or Adonai Shadowbows I should say, are over here trying to shoot along the Cardolan line. You can see there, that is the problem with Cardolan. That is why people are a little bit leery of them. because there is a big rout, and that is going to leave a huge hole in the front line. The trolls are here. This section of the Cardolan line, the orcs are running through, overwhelming the men of Eriador. And this is the problem for Cardolan, to be honest with you. They're going to need those Dol Amroth reinforcements pretty quickly, and the defenders smell blood now, because the Lothlorien cavalry is charging forwards, hoping to take advantage of the gap that the Mordor infantry has given to them. And to be fair, they do get a charge off into the Minhiriath sharpshooters, and they are causing chaos. I mean, there are Tharbad Warhammers on the front line who should bring about a swift end to the Olag High now. And as far as AP goes, they are the superior of the Sauron's Will. The Dunedain captains are in here as well, but it's gone pretty badly for Cardolan so far. They're going to need to hope that their archers and their skirmishers can make Mordor pay just as much as they have in that infantry engagement. And Dol Amroth are arriving now, but is it too little, too late, I wonder, to save Cardolan? There, meanwhile, almost looks like lasers, doesn't it, the Kindred of Celeborn's arrows, hitting the Scourge Raiders. Lorien very eager to get rid of those Scourge Raiders, not wanting to allow Angmar to use their throwing projectiles. Dorananil swordsmen making their way to the front line, poison arrows streaking in from overhead. Belfast Marines are in melee, which is not a good sign if they've used up their ammunition already. And still, there's a lot of damage they're taking down here. Units like Perithil Champions will be a good target to go after. We're actually going after the Tirithea Marksmen, you can see there. There's also Goblin Trackers, so any collateral damage is a bonus. Yeah, it's definitely proving to be a bruising encounter so far. Dol Amroth trying to counter skirmish as well with their Tirithea Marksmen. Might be worth going after the infantry, actually, shooting into the sides there. Perhaps with the Wanderers of Nimrodel. The Horse Archers also being used, so Silverthorns, meaning that advancing up this hill is even more hellish than it otherwise could have been. This is Lothlorien in their element. They've got their opponent bottled up. In the melee fight, it's a matter of skill and AP that they're going to be very dominant with, and they're able to use their incredibly dangerous archer lineup to its fullest. So I do agree, actually, that probably this Mordor choke point, which is wider, more ripe for the attacking, is probably the way to go. So I do agree with the Dol Amroth players' idea to come over here and support Cardolan primarily. The Tarnostian Spearmen, maybe not the best fight for them against the Orc Maulers, but the Orc Maulers are stretched quite a lot, and they're having to deal with some Black Swan Renegades as well, whose maces will be able to crack through the makeshift armour of the Maulers. Melkor's Chosen are over here as well, trying to shore things up for the defenders. Still, this Elven Cavalry proving to be a real pain in the neck of Cardolan, because the main thing Cardolan will still have going for them, after all, are their crossbows. They will still be able to utilise them, but I mean, the Elven Cavalry is making even that difficult at this stage. Manatar Roman Gatekeepers trying to do their thing. To be fair though, with the arrival of Dol Amroth, they now have enough infantry around here, you would imagine, to keep this assault going for a little longer. You can see here as well the Greenway units actually fighting for longer than the middle of the line, which is kind of interesting. Adonheim Shadowbows have taken a lot of damage in the background, Temple Guard's still healthy, but some pikes coming to the aid of these partially surrounded Greenway units that are fighting over here. But you can see they were fighting against the Minas Morgul Chosen, a far superior unit, but they weren't able to get the job done quickly enough in terms of damage, even against a more basic unit like the Greenways. So it does go to show the Minas Morgul Chosen are definitely at their best when it comes to being combined with another unit. However, with the arrival of the Temple Inquisitors charging in, things continue to be difficult for Cardolan. Manatar Roman Gatekeepers firing a nasty volley into the Temple Inquisitors though, which will be very, very nice for them. And there are a lot of Dol Amroth spears around here as well, to be fair, so Temple Inquisitors do need to be a little bit careful. I wonder where the Nazgul went. There is still the matter of this fight over here, and you can see that the Tharbad Warhammer is still alive and well, as are the Dunedain captains. Some of the Black Swan Renegades making their way to this fight over here as well, and the Horns of Tir Gorthad still alive and well. So yeah, even the Temple Executioners on the front line over here probably going to struggle, even if this Cardolan blob is the primary target of all of the nasty Mordor skirmishers. And the Troll Drummers just making life more difficult for the attackers as well, making sure that even if Mordor do end up getting a little bit thin on the ground, stuff like these Orc Maulers who are wavering would have already routed if not for the presence of the Drummers. And the Melkor's Chosen moving in as well. Tarnostian Spearmen way behind enemy lines at this point, but they're going to get found by something surely. Those Doranand Archers actually are very depleted, which is kind of interesting. Meanwhile, the killing fields over here, the Angmar Trolls trying to give the attackers some momentum. The Barrow Wights wouldn't be a bad idea either, maybe should have been sent in a little sooner even. March Wardens of the Wood firing down into the Tirithea marksmen. And forward come the Barrow-wights. We've got here Woodland Protectors back up here. I mean, to be fair, neither side is really leaving too much back. They really are going at one another hammer and tongs here, as perhaps you would expect given the... usually on the Iron Hills, especially in an attack-defense type situation, the defenders do tend to sort of put up a token defense here and then fall back to this section of the map over here, and it gives it a longer run time. But this time I think the defenders are just going all out for the front. Maybe with the damage they were doing initially they felt as though it was the best choice. Time will tell whether that proves to be a wise decision. In come the Melkor's Chosen. Charging into the Men of Roman Gatekeepers is a bold move. And indeed some of them end up dying, and they don't really do too much damage to the Men of Cardolan by doing that. Should probably look for targets that are more in line with what they're capable of killing. More routing Greenway units. Here are the Nazgul, actually. There are 9 of them, finishing off this heavily depleted section of Tarnostian Spearmen. The Temple Inquisitors are back here as well, still making life very difficult for Cardolan sharpshooters. And the Hearthguard are back here. The Hearthguard probably, well, I mean, if the Inquisitors were feeling adventurous, maybe they could have tried to target down the Hearthguard, but I wouldn't have recommended it at all, really. Those spears would have made it a losing proposition to do so, but Mordor, they've done well enough, I think. I do think the attackers will ultimately be victorious over here, but it will be at a big cost, especially to Cardolan. They'll have a few units left standing, but will it be sufficient later on in the fight to help out against Lothlorien, who are doing really well in that hill defence? Melkor's Chosen is still a big problem as well. Whatever happened to the Dol Amroth cavalry? Is this it over here? Nope, the Wanderers of Nimrodel are very sadly, I think, wasting their ammunition in a rather gross fashion, if I'm being honest. This sort of thing might be okay in campaign, where you want to try and kill off the enemy and finish the battle with 0 casualties. This, however, is not what you want to be doing. Using your ranger ammunition on orc fodder. The Mordor player must be rubbing his hands together with glee at this, because mission accomplished already. The cavalry, if you want to get through here with your Knights of the Silver Swan, you should just charge through and pull them through. Like against orc fodder, especially now, you're continuing to use ammunition on them, but you can just charge into them and pull through. Really low end spears like this are no problem if you just cycle charge in and out. And then you can have all of this room to play with. If it were Lorenan spears, it would be a different matter. But it's orc fodder, and he's using ranger ammunition on them, which is not what you want to be doing, of course. Meanwhile, what have we here? Watchers of the Goldenwood firing down. I mean, to be fair, Dol Amroth and Angmar skirmish line is still kind of intact. Blood sprays. That's never a good effect to see up close. It could very easily result in a crash, but Watchers of the Goldenwood shooting into that blob with the Barrow-wights on the front line, though. They're starting to gain the upper hand a little bit. Very interesting indeed. Meanwhile, here are the Haven Knights. They moved over here, so finally Dol Amroth have got their melee knights over here giving a hand. And you can see here the Melkor's Chosen. This again is very bold. They're charging right into the front of pikes, and you can see the results there. Lots of damage as the charge is reflected right back at them. Greenway unit's going to try and interrupt the Temple Guard, and they will probably succeed. Interesting that the Haven Knights are just staying in melee with trolls. If this were anything other than troll drummers, they would probably be taking losses that they really wouldn't want to be. Melkor's Chosen very depleted after their escapades against the pikes, but yes, victory for the attackers over here as Cardolan and Dol Amroth continue to push forwards. Cavalry in the background there. What is that? This is the Riders of the Golden Wood, so still defending cavalry, making their presence felt, and the Nazgul are still here. They're taking losses though. They had 9 just a second ago when we were over here last. Only have 5 now. That might have something to do with the fact that they're going up against actually some decent units in the Doomdine Captains, but they rout obviously after the charge from the Riders of the Golden Wood. And over there, some Orc Maulers who probably have returned from routing. We'll see if Mordor will return them to the fray at any point. We've got here Lorien Mounted Company charging in. Looks like they did a lot of damage there to the Mihiriath sharpshooters, so a good catch. But it must be said that the attacks are still victorious over here, most certainly. The cavalry finally makes its way through, as the Wanderers of Nimrodel now are firing into the Lorenan spears. Again, it's only a single unit, so it's not the worst thing in the world. Oof, my voice is on its last legs, I think. This is the last thing I'm recording in a long line of pre-recording ahead of time. Hopefully my voice doesn't give out entirely. But yes, 2 units of Knights of the Silver Swan. Now they have the opportunity to use their lancers in behind enemy lines. And so now they also cannot retreat back over to the normal final stand. They're going to have to use this little raised plateau here. Which again, this is the only time I've seen this map work out in this fashion. Watchers of the Golden Wood are in an excellent position to utilise their ammunition here, shooting into the side of this rather large blob. But there's so many barrow wights in there that the amount of actual kills you're probably going to be getting is probably quite limited. Still Guardians of Cardolan, still Blackwatch Legion, so they weren't wasted earlier. There are Witchround Blackguard in there as well, and there's still a lot of Lothlorien units, to be fair, that are fighting hard. Woodland Protectors, though, is that really going to be sufficient? Might be the time now to just leave this as a rear guard and pull back all of these units that are just waiting here, because I mean, if they wait much longer, Lorenan Swordmasters, Lorenan Warriors, the perfect targets for this roaming Dol Amroth cavalry if they're able to react quickly enough. It's going to be a matter of who pulls the trigger first, and it's going to be Lorien, I think, as they try and squirm away. So Dol Amroth missing the opportunity potentially. There's still time, after all, for the cavalry to close in. Here we go, and they do. They will manage to close in. I thought he was going to let them escape and let them get away with that for a second, and he is. Oh no, it's such a shame. Oh, he lost his bottle. He clicked a different attack order. The lances were down, and he... Oh, that's a shame. That's a real shame. They are going to get a nice charge downhill here into the Woodland Protectors, which is nice, but once again, it's been a real theme of the last few battles, hasn't it? Players just not committing to their cavalry attack orders. Cavalry is not instantly responsive. You need to give them time to charge up and get their lances down. If you change the attack order and expect them to turn on a dime, they're not going to do it, and you're just going to bump harmlessly into the enemy with their swords out rather than their lances down. And once again, Dol Amroth falling into that trap, as Rohan have before them in the last couple of games. Routing units abound. Kindred of Celeborn are on the front line, actually, which is a unit that Lorien will be sad to lose, but lose them they will. I think the attackers are actually in a good position moving forward here. They took some heavy losses early on, but as it often sort of ends up working out, to be honest with you, in the mid-game the attackers seem to have taken advantage of some questionable moves from the defenders, and that leaves them, I think, with the advantage going into the final phase of this battle. We shall see. Meanwhile, they are banking up, but it's very exposed over here, to be honest. Orc Maulers, Woodland Protectors, healthy Watchers of the Golden Wood, a lot of Lorien units mainly, Swordmasters, 2 units of them, AP, Axemen who aren't AP but have got a high base attack and a shield, Temple Guard, maybe if they still have ammunition. There's not, to be honest though, there's not actually a lot in terms of spears. I mean, the closest thing to an anti-cavalry unit they have is probably the ammunition from the Temple Guard. And then heavy axemen in melee, but off the charge they still do badly. I mean, they have 1 unit of Woodland Protectors, which are spears as well. But this cavalry could just charge in from the front and maybe do the business, which is worrying, to say the least. Over here they do have a unit of Lorenan Spearmen, which have finished off the Wanderers of Nimrodel, so Lorien do have a bit of a wildcard unit over here towards the side of the map. It'll be interesting to see how they factor in as well, because as well as that, there was that unit of Orc Maulers, which I think now has routed off for good. Yes, so they were sort of called back, but as soon as they went anywhere near, they immediately routed off again. Still, it's not as if the attackers have got a huge army left to them either. How much ammunition they have could also prove to be fairly key. But this cavalry, do they actually have the means to stop it from just knocking down the front door, essentially? The Watchers of the Golden will still have ammo? They do indeed. And what are they going to go after? Tirithea Marksmen, who are looking to perhaps try and shoot into the side of this defence, and they're immediately going to be introduced to the business end of one of the scarier archer units in the game. I doubt the defenders would have wanted to spend this ammunition simply counter-skirmishing, but it's better than doing nothing and allowing yourself to get shot. Of course, it looks devastating, the Silverthorn arrows, but it's appearances can be somewhat deceiving. Like, a lot of these units will get back up and the Tirithair marks are now armoured enough to the point where they can withstand a lot of punishment, but that is among some of the most damaging archer payloads that there are in the game, as the Barrow Wights continue to slowly meander their way up here. So just taking stock of the situation, there is actually some defending reinforcements on the way over, but for now, not really a terribly important thing. Cardolan, a lot of their units are gone, but they still have some pikes and some decent halberdiers and melee Tharbad warhammers as well. One of the most significant units going into the final phase of this battle may very well be the Barrow Wights because of how difficult they are to get rid of, even for those higher quality Elven units. The Blackwatch Legion as well can push through the lines easily, but I mean, where are they actually pushing to would be a good question, because they can push through, but all they'll really do is turn this fight into a bit of a mess, and at that point you're just trusting in your quality to get the job done. Will that work? I'm not sure. Cavalry is just charging in from the front though, and I agree with this decision, to be honest with you. If you charge in and out, you're going to do huge damage to a unit like the Orc Maulers, and it will make the job of the defenders significantly harder to go on to win this battle. Armour-piercing arrows coming in now though, Orc Maulers trying to countercharge, and they do actually land it, but it was at an awkward angle, so not a lot of it actually connected. Marchwards of the Wood look like they're out of ammunition, but you can't afford to use anything as disposable at this point. Everyone's going to be key in this defence, but the Dol Amroth player has got the right idea. I think he notices that there isn't really anything anti-cavalry on display anymore for the defenders, and now you can continue to charge in with your heavy lancers, and this is perhaps one of the few times we've seen the Knights of the Silver Swan have the opportunity to be brutally effective. They're also going to be supported by the Witch Realm Hammerguard and Blackguard. You can see actually the Orc Maulers are routing, seeing the situation as being rather hopeless. This is a sign that perhaps the Woodland Protectors should have been on the front line, the only spear unit they had left, but now the floodgates may very well be opening as the Lances come down. They can actually connect with the Nazgul, they charge into a lot of the Lothlorien units. This will be painful for the Knights of the Silver Swan, but they will also do some damage in return to the high quality Lothlorien units that the defenders are basically placing their faith in at this point. Either they will give the defenders victory or they will crumble. We'll have to wait and see. Dol Amroth need to get their Cav out of here though. They can still be useful later on. At this point I would say the Cav have done their work for the time being. If you end up losing the front line fight, that's when you can hit the panic button and try and use the cavalry again, but just having them in here doing this is not going to yield too much in the way of results against this higher damage infantry that they're having to face off against here, if I'm being honest. Tharbad Warhammers coming in, but not in the numbers that will be required to kill off all of these warriors of Lothlorien. There are still those Lorien spears biding their time to come over here as well. Wounds of Tir Gorthad, Hearthguard of Amon Sul, and Ethelon Halberdiers making their way to the front line also. Phalanx units galore. Bit of AP mixed in there as well. Temple Guard firing. There's still 6 Adonai Shadow Bows. 24 Lorien archers as well. Again, just charging into the back of their own men though, so that's not really going to be effective. Like I said, the Knights of the Silver Swan would be best off just being held back for the time being. Have any ammunition left? There's still Haven Knights, so cavalry abound. The Barrow Wights are still slowly shuffling their way in, although I'm not sure, to be honest. It's going to be touch and go. I think a lot of it is going to be coming down to how well the Angmar elites can do. Because to be honest, like again, there's elites on both sides, but most of this defence was made up of Lorenan units who are of good quality, it must be said. Higher quality certainly than basic Dol Amroth and Cardolan troops. And with a little bit of support coming in from the side, Temple Guard, you can see there the Scourge Raiders trying to bring them down, but it's not going to be easy. Armour-piercing missiles on the Temple Guard, not a huge amount of them, not a huge amount of DPS coming off them at the moment, I don't think, but I say that. They're in a good position to shoot the Angmar elites, so the Mordor player is definitely doing the right thing. In come the Watchers of the Golden Wood. In terms of melee abilities, the strongest unit the defenders had left, so they're getting in here to try and meet the attackers where they are at their strongest as well. I don't think any of the Nazgul survived the charge from the Knights of the Silver Swan, who are still in melee, bafflingly enough. Still a bit of damage coming forward from the Lorenan archers. I mean, if they're going to win this, it will be on the back of Lothlorien's quality. Any support Mordor can offer from stuff like their Temple Guard will be a bonus. I think they're out of ammo now though, because they're charging into melee. I mean, they're good in melee as well, so their presence on the front line will be appreciated. And the Angmar general is right here. Loss of their general may very well result in the routing of stuff like the Guardians of Khan Doom, but their bodyguard tier units and the Barrow Wights will stick around to the bitter end. This cavalry is still a problem as well. The announcer seems to favour the attackers. I mean, I would agree on the front line. I mean, javelins are coming in. Cavalry could get around the flank. There is a good opportunity here for Dol Amroth. I mean, they flatten what's left of those rangers. But they have the opportunity now to get into the back lines, which he is taking. And I have to give the Dol Amroth player credit, to be honest with you, because this cavalry is really the thing that should be putting this game beyond the reach of the defenders, and using it in this way is exactly the way in which that can happen. Because there are still, of course, those Lothlorien spearmen making their way over. But they're going to arrive a little bit too late, I think. Dol Amroth's cavalry really getting in the way of that range support that could be so crucial. Horns of Tir Gorthad fighting at arm's length, still javelins raining down from the Belfalas Marines. Lothlorien are doing well on the front line. I'm just not convinced they have enough to actually see themselves fully over the line, especially when it comes to stuff like Barrow Wights. But still 83 heavy spears. Maybe it's enough. Not really much damage. Obviously that wasn't really much of a charge as such. They were just sort of engaging at close range, which is going to be bad news for the Knights of the Silver Swan, as these elves managed to connect with their swords. But still, it's more pressure being put on Lothlorien, and ultimately it is a problem. They are being attacked in the rear ultimately. Even if it wasn't a charge, it's still getting messy now, which is a concern. Routing units back there. The Barrow Wights are turning around, which I think is actually a mistake. I mean, you want a unit which isn't just going to be easily avoided in terms of speed. You may as well just get the Barrow Wights on the front line and try and chase after them with something else, to be honest with you. As the cavalry tries to get a little bit more space, a little bit more room to charge, will they get their lances down? No. Again, that's not something Elendikar, however, can be blamed for. There goes Mordor's general. Was in the Temple Guard unit, killed ultimately by the mighty Witch Realm Hammer Guard. Been a brave effort from the defenders. I think they have done quite well here in the final phase. I just don't think they had enough left. I think when Mordor crumbled, when the Dol Amroth support came from Cardolan, I think that was a key moment in this battle. And ultimately it was a blow from which I do not believe the defenders can recover. Interestingly enough, the Lorenan Spears fighting uphill into the Manatar Roman gatekeepers, and they're going to be surrounded as well by Barrow Wights. They will lose, but they are keeping these units off the front line, which is better than doing nothing. But I do not believe they have much left in the tank. Some routing units from Dol Amroth here, not fancying sticking around for too much longer. Still, cavalry from Dol Amroth hunting down what remains of these archers behind enemy lines. One of them actually still lives, as he pulls out his elven bow again. He's going to try and shoot into the side of them, and here he has sharpshooters, I believe. Nope, he's just going to stand there. But yes, also here in the late game, one thing that has definitely, I think, put it beyond the defenders is how Dol Amroth have been willing to use their cavalry. They've been willing to take risks, and they have paid off ultimately, which is good to see. It's better than being overly cautious and not using a unit at all. Lothlorien will take some killing though. They will not go down without a fight, especially not units like the Watchers of the Golden Wood. In come the Blackwatch Legion to try and disrupt their formation, make it a little bit easier perhaps for the Hammer Guard to deliver some blows. What is going on here? Temple Guard are broken. You know that the situation is bad when the Temple Guard are fleeing for the hills. What's that back there? Some Tarnostian spears routing off. Does go to show the resilience of Lothlorien though. They may not have quite the same armour values as in Ladros, but they are still a tanky force to bring down. Like, especially when it comes to their upper end units, like they can stand and fight for a good long time. Good combination of armour and defence skill. And here we have sharpshooters doing their thing as well. Again, a pretty tame charge, but again, Dol Amroth are doing the right thing here. They're not really going to have the room to get up to a huge charge, but they're still contributing with their cavalry, whittling down the defence. And this is ultimately going to result in an attacker victory, so Angmar winning the bet. Sauron's probably a sore loser though, so if I were the Witch King I would maybe steer clear of Barad-dûr for a little while until he's had time to cool down. Lorenan Spears at this point are shaken. You know it's a bad sign when the upper crust of the Elven units are starting to falter in terms of morale, and Angmar's general does ultimately fall. He's been fighting on the front line near some very dangerous units for a little while after all, so maybe it's not the most surprising thing in the world. Another one of the Tirithea marksmen falls there. Watch to the Goldenwood victory seems certain for them. I mean, actually, having a look at this is actually turning against the attackers a little bit. They've got their crossbows in behind enemy lines. I mean, if Lothlorien go on to win this, it will really show their abilities up close and personal in a melee fight like this. It will show their ability to deal damage, certainly, as well as withstand punishment. And it may be that, like, taking these barrow wights off the front line has just made the attacking front line just a little bit too soft. The barrow wights would have made it much more difficult to mulch through the line in the way that they have. And morale certainly proving to be an issue. Hearthguard of Amon-Sul doing their thing, the Haven Knights pulling in and out. I mean, the Cavalry has done its part, insofar as it can. I still think it's too much for the defenders to go on to win this, because they have to kill off 27 Scourge Raiders, 229 Barrow Wights, and they will ultimately have to deal with the Gatekeepers as well. I don't think Lothlorien will be capable of that, but they really rallied there. Never count the elves out, I guess. Another charge from the Haven Knights, more valuable manpower evaporating for Lothlorien. So yeah, it is ultimately going to be an attacking victory, I think, but that could have been so very, very different. It was very close there to being a bit of an embarrassing end for the attackers, but they do ultimately manage to fall over the line, and they will claim victory here in the Iron Hills. There's still one archer. He probably won't live through that, and indeed he won't. Trampled by the Haven Knights. And that means Haldir and his retinue, the only ones left really, 26 Watchers of the Goldenwood who are shaken. He's getting charged. That one didn't kill him. Imrahil versus Haldir. There's still these Minhiriath sharpshooters as well. I mean, it could be the Watchers of the Goldenwood actually breaks. I can't imagine that 20 of them will die off in the next 400 frames. But a close fight indeed. Having a look at the percentages there, I mean, yeah, 6% seems about right. I mean, you know, most of that 6%, to be honest, is bound up in this one unit of Barrow Wights from Angmar. Dol Amroth and Cardolan have got really very little left, and to be honest, beyond the Barrow Wights, nor do Angmar.
Fate has been kind and delivered us victory.
Indeed. May not have been a lore-friendly battle, but it was definitely a lot of back and forth in that one. So big thank you to Vlasov for sending this one to me, and big thank you to all of the players that were a part of this one. So you can see based on the kill counts here, Mordor did well initially, but I do think it was ultimately the arrival of the reinforcements of Dol Amroth and the choke point being too wide for them to really hold on to that did them in ultimately. You can see that Lothlorien had a lot of luck and success on their choke point because it was narrower and it was pretty much perfect for their arrows to just rain hell down upon the units trying to climb the hill. So pretty much the ideal situation for Lothlorien to thrive in. And we did actually see Lothlorien utilised very well today, I think. Showed their strengths off very nicely. Mordor as well, to be fair. I think the Beasts of Gorgoroth were probably a little bit of a disappointment for Pimp, but again, there is a reason why you don't see them or the Mumakil brought that off, and it's because they're extremely high risk and a little bit too easy to counter, I think, even without the javelins being able to instantly kill them like they used to be able to. I still think that it's very difficult to utilise them effectively for their price anyway. It's interesting. I would say that there is a case for saying maybe their price should be reduced. I mean, you do open up potential exploits there where Mumakil just run through the lines constantly. That is very micro-intensive. It can happen, but I mean, I think seeing them every now and then would be nice, and the same's true for the Beasts of Gorgoroth here. And the problem is exacerbated for them because they are even more fragile, relatively speaking. Obviously, they're giant and they've got lots of hit points and lots of defensive stats, but much in the same way as chariots, that doesn't count for an awful lot. Considering what they are, they're massive and easy to hit, and any attack that goes their way is going to land, and if it has significant bonuses, it may very well kill them, as you saw with the crossbow fire. Regardless, let's see what did the damage for Cardolan. Minotaur, Rom and Gatekeepers performing very well, as did the sharpshooters. So yeah, the crossbows in behind the lines, even early on when Cardolan was struggling on the front line, their crossbows were still doing the business, Hearthguard were here for a long time but didn't get a lot of kills, but one of the units of pikes getting over 100 kills as well. The Tharbad Warhammers doing very nicely. They were in the battle for a long time, getting 185, but for the most part it was the ranged units, the crossbows in particular, that Cardolan brought to the field, as is usual, really. That's what you expect Cardolan to really be good at and really bring to the table. So yeah, once again, big thank you to Vlasov for saying this one to me. Like I said, it's a map that I do enjoy. We haven't seen it work out in exactly that fashion before. Like I said, this is pretty much the last in the line of recording that I've been doing for the next 2 or 3 weeks at the time of recording this anyway. So this is sort of building up, getting ready for sort of the university start, and this is the last one. I do have another replay that I can do at the moment as well, which is Dale. So obviously doing all these replays in close proximity means I've basically gone through the entirety of the current backlog I have, except for the Dale battle, and the reason for that is that if I don't get any more replays in between now and the start of uni in the next couple of weeks, which obviously at the time of you seeing this will have been the last couple of weeks in the past, then I will use Dale as sort of an emergency replay to tide me over for a few more days. But obviously, again, I'm always on the lookout for more replays, and this is sort of the fashion that I'm going to be trying to do my recording in the future, sort of big clumps of recording, as it were, because that's how I'm going to have to do things sort of in the long-term future, as I said, when it comes to sort of university being over with. I think that that's how I'm going to have to pivot my my workflow, rather than doing them in bits and pieces like I have done throughout to sort of fit around other things. I think I'm going to have to do them in big blocks instead, so that I can sort of have a constant schedule. So that's the situation I'm in at the moment. So if anyone does have any replays, even at the time of seeing this, when hopefully I would have gotten a few more anyway, do send them in, because it is the lifeblood of the channel after all, and it wouldn't be able to function as it does without it. So yeah, big thank you to Vlasov once again with all the players. There'll be streams, obviously, still replays. Hopefully the schedule is as it is now, like 2 streams a week, 2 pre-records a week. That's what I'm sticking to for the time being. If it does change, it'll probably be as a result of sort of university kicking back in, but I doubt it will, to be honest with you. The only thing that will change in that schedule, I think, is the order in which I do it, because as at the moment what I do is sort of either side of the weekend or during the weekend there will be the 2 pre-records, and then sort of in the middle of the week there'll be the 2 streams. That may very well change around a little bit when university starts back up, because obviously the weekend might be a little bit better for streaming at that point, but we shall see. Regardless, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.